I believe that trying and failing is better than not trying and playing it safe. Because I think the more you try and you fail things, that's how you learn. So, like, it's okay to go out and make mistakes. A problem doesn't necessarily equal a headache or a problem. A problem equals an opportunity.
I think it's terribly important to insist on individual values.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Initiative, creation, all these things which we value. It's now possible to make organizations on a larger scale than was ever possible before.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Teach people to analyze the kind of things that are said to them.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Learning Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Barry. This is a show about creating cultures of learning inside companies. And joining me today is Keith Weightman. Keith is the RVP of sales at Bullhorn. And these kind of conversations are some of my favorite to do because Keith obviously is not in learning. He's a salesman and is leading a sales team. So he obviously does care about developing people and developing himself. And I always love hearing about it from people from that perspective where they have the same ambitions and drives around development, but are in the trenches themselves. And so this was a conversation packed with stories. And just it was great to kind of see how similarly Keith and I think about things. In this conversation, you're going to hear a lot about the context that we're in, where there's a lot of uncertainty and volatility in the market, and really how to respond in that way and how to stand out in these tough times. Keith talks about winning the moments and how every win matters, and some great stories around those ideas. Being open to learning from unexpected places. What do you do if you guess or say the wrong thing? During a discovery call, there's a great conversation around that. And really what I found in talking to Keith is that a lot of what he was sharing was filtered through the lens of how he talks about this to his team. And he brought up a lot of great examples about the leadership programs that they're running at Bullhorn and really what he does with his specific team, which if you follow Keith on LinkedIn, you will know is a big, big part of the way he approaches his work. So there's tons of great insights in here from that perspective. And right at the end, I started to realize that there was someone on Keith's team that I needed to talk to. So stay tuned for a future episode with that. But without further ado, today's episode, you can sit back, relax, and enjoy with Keith Weightman. Keith, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, this has been a long time coming, and I'm glad we've waited because I think we both had a lot of learnings and more experience that we're going to unpack today. The topic I want to start with, I want to kind of set the scene for I think a lot of our conversation here is this idea of kind of winning the moments. And for people listening, you and I had this a little bit conversation before we started. A lot of companies are facing uncertainty, increased uncertainty of the sort of magnitude that they haven't before. And what that's playing out as is, if not decline, it's certainly growth that has kind of stalled or slowed down. And basically what did work is no longer working. And so what we keep hearing is leaders are kind of having to think, almost beyond even innovation. They're having to invent. They're having to come up with new ways of kind of creating value at existing accounts. That's probably, the first priority. Then new ways of kind of closing new business, which is the hardest thing to do right now. All of this is kind of involving innovation and creativity and really thinking outside the box. And one of the things you and I talked about was, winning the moments, because it's now, those are so key. Like previously we could like throw everything at the wall and, things would just work and you'd close enough deals and people wouldn't really care. Now the moments are starting to like pop up and be quite important, right? And there's a lot riding on those moments. And we'll talk about like what characterizes those moments, I guess. But like, what does that mean for you? You talked about there's a kind of a rallying cry as well that you're getting behind.
Yeah. And I think to add to what you said around things have changed, things are differently. So the industry that we work in, specifically software for staffing firms, staffing in general, the industry is forecasting to be down 10%, where the previous, 2021, there was 20% growth. 2022, there was 34% growth. So now you ride this high where customers are buying to now they're forecasted to be down and customers are conserving cash. They're being
Mhm.
really cautious, and where we would go in and try and position everything and people were buying, that no longer works anymore. We've got to think differently of how we package our services. We have to unbundle things to try to get like a Trojan horse strategy. But
Mhm.
the whole win the week phrase came from my SVP in a meeting because we were so used to winning and winning a lot these last 2 years, and now it's things have changed, and we've got to put in process around how do we win even the small moments to feel
Yeah.
like we're moving in the right direction. And that's things around creating better customer experiences, renewals, upsells, and celebrating some of the small wins because things are different than they were, in the past 2 years.
Mm. Yeah, so let's talk about those moments, winning the week, winning the moments. Like these are things that we were able to gloss over somewhat before, and take some losses that didn't really matter. Now every single moment counts. So one of the things that strikes me about these moments is that we're talking about like basically person to person conversations, right? A lot of it comes down to that, like discovery calls, negotiations. Does that feel true to you as well?
Yeah, for sure. And it's also the fact that it's when there's times where it's not like you've got a bunch of opportunities coming in, how do you give people the feeling that they know what they should be doing day over day and they feel like they've got a goal to work towards, so they feel like they're winning, even
Mhm.
though that the progress may not be a closed deal, but they're making progress on their skill set. They're making progress on, as you mentioned, a discovery call or negotiation because they're learning new skills.
Mm.
And that's really what we think of how do we give our people the pathway and the process to feel like they're winning the week or winning the day.
Okay, this is a cool point, because what you're talking about here is essentially progress, learning as progress. Like you're talking about seeing learning as progress. So not necessarily the metrics. Like it may be that you didn't actually qualify that lead or close that deal, but if you learned something, you're still attributing progress.
100%. And we actually, for me, I'm a big believer in times of when things are tough, and we've geeked out over like the whole like learning and how we love to learn. I'm a
Right.
big believer when times are tough, like that's when you double down on enablement, and because those that are getting better are the ones that are going to stand out in tough times where things aren't just coming to them. So we've done a lot around enablement and making sure our people feel like they have paths for learning and development, probably in some cases more than they're probably like, all right, chill with enablement. But I'm a big believer, like if you're not learning something new every single day, you're falling behind those that are putting in the work to do so.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about how you. So first of all, I'd say 80-90% of the audience listening to this is going to be cheering for you right now, because they're probably beating this drum constantly, and you seem to get it. And so I'm assuming kind of you partner very closely with your enablement internally.
Very much so, yes. Our internal sales enablement team has always done a really nice job around like our product centric training and things
Mm.
like that. But I really wanted to get more skill based training, and there's always there's this push. You know how salespeople are, right? They feel like, oh well, if enablement's giving me a training, they're not selling what I'm selling. They're
Yeah.
not talking with customers. They couldn't sell, so they went to train, which is not the case, but that's the
Mm.
perception
Mm.
that they get.
Yeah.
So we actually ended up partnering not too long ago because of a relationship with Sales Assembly to help with enablement and on-demand training as well as face-to-face.
Mm.
But I would tell you, like, to your point of partnering with enablement. If you don't have a sales leader that believes in it and is a mobilizer to help, then enablement teams typically will struggle because they don't have someone partnering with them to make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And even an investment in something like a sales assembly can become a massive waste of resources, because if it's not backed up by leadership saying, like, hey, this is important, like demonstrating that this is important.
Yes.
Right. So how do you, as a leader, you clearly get this kind of stuff. If you had to reflect on your leadership style, like how are you demonstrating that this stuff matters to your team?
Well, I think it's leading by, like, if I say, here's a training that I think would benefit us all, like, I'm on the training. And I'm typically one of the first people that attend the trainings. I give feedback on the trainings. One, because I never think I'm above learning something, even if it's a topic that I feel like I've got a pretty good skill set on, or it's being taught by someone that may have less experience than I do. Like, I learn stuff from people that are far less experienced than I am. And,
Mm.
it bothers me when there is a sales rep or a leader that doesn't feel like they can get something from a training. They're like, no, I'm good. Because to me, it's like, you're always learning. But again, maybe that's just my personality. I like to learn. Some people just
Yeah.
don't have that same drive, and that's okay. That's not,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd say it's certainly personality based. It's probably a lot of it is mindset, and a lot of it comes down to like a growth versus a fixed mindset, and you clearly demonstrating examples. Yeah, so let's give people some specifics. Actually, like, can you take a beat if you need to, of something you have learned recently from kind of an unexpected source, maybe from someone who was more junior than you, something like that that sort of recently made an impact on you.
Well, I sat on a training today with Sales Assembly. It was a discovery training, and I've been through hundreds of discovery trainings in my lifetime. And I don't think that anything and it was from Sarah Brazier, who's an AE over at Gong. She led the training. And I don't think anything that she did completely was unexpected, but it was things that I know that people don't always do. Like something as simple as, hey, when you're going into this discovery call, here's some ways to make sure that you're doing some basic research to understand who you're reaching out to, what's going on in the business, and form an opinion about what you think may be the reason that they've accepted the call.
Mm.
Rather than going in and saying, I'm here to learn more about your business, it's, hey, I'm here to learn more about your business because I saw that you guys have just made 6 acquisitions. You're growing in EMEA, and it looks like maybe you're moving from a product-led growth strategy to more of an enterprise motion. But I'm curious to learn more from you, right? So you go in there and have an opinion. And for me, that's just good reinforcement to make sure that my team is doing similar things. Because I think oftentimes we either get complacent or we stop doing the things that matter at preparation.
Mm.
In times like these, you really can't, because you will lose to the people that are doing the preparation.
Yeah. That's a fantastic example. And it actually is a good segue into what I want to ask you about. So we'll zoom into that moment. But I think a couple of important points there. Like, you cannot reinforce that stuff enough. Like, you just having it, even you today had a reminder of its importance. That's going to have some cascading effect to your team. And so that's great. To me, that like creates a really strong floor, right? Also, because it you can train people how to do that. You can teach them, right? They can follow the steps and do that, and it sets them up for success in those calls. There's probably a bunch of other great benefits to that, but that feels like a really important piece of the puzzle here. I want to talk about kind of the next step in this process, because this is the part that I'm most interested in, which is, so yes, you have this really solid floor that you can learn how to, basically what you described was kind of like you come up with an hypothesis for that client. And that's awesome. Like that you did that work up front and you're going into that call. But then the object of the call becomes either validating or falsifying the hypothesis, right?
Correct.
And there's a whole skill set around how to do that. Good, like asking good questions, building rapport, all those kind of things to be able to validate or falsify. And then let's assume you did falsify it, to not just end there, right? Because like then there's a bunch of other opportunity that you may not have picked up from the research that you've done that you can pick up on that call. And then now we're talking about winning the moments, right? Like how do you do that, right? So now if we zoom into those kind of moments, so there's the skill around kind of falsifying or whatever the thing, and then if that didn't go well, and it's not actually, it's a good thing either way, right? Either we validate it, great, we move forward, or we falsify it, and then we can still move forward to finding other opportunities. But that's a whole different skill set. And to me, that's that kind of like, that's when you're into that low data environment and you're just dealing with someone, you're in conversation, you're talking, you're trying to listen to key words. There's a whole lot around that. Do you feel like we train people well enough to do that part of it?
I think we try, but are people as proficient as what we would probably like them to be? No, because I think for many new salespeople, or even salespeople have been doing this for a while. Sometimes us sellers are like, if there's we're like a hammer that needs to find a nail,
Yeah.
like, right? We're at a one-track mind. We've got a product that we want to sell versus taking the time to really understand what the customer is trying to do. And is it a problem that we can actually solve? So I've always been a big proponent of, like, you need to go into these calls with you form some type of, as you mentioned, opinion or what you think may be going on. And where most people get nervous is, well, what if I guess the wrong thing? Well, people love to correct those that are wrong. So you win either way, right? You either validate or you falsify, and then you get to the root of what the actual reason we're having that conversation. And that comes in part of really active listening, asking more questions than you probably feel comfortable with, and really letting your prospect or customer talk. Especially, we do a lot of call recordings where we'll go back and we'll do some coaching there. And one of the first things I typically look at, because you can see it visually, is like call time between, talk time between the two. And it varies based on the type of call that you're doing. But on a discovery, like, I feel like the talk time should be way more heavily leaning on the customer or the prospect side than on the rep side. Because the discovery, to me, is all about learning and understanding versus trying to tell or educate.
Yeah, exactly. So learning and understanding. Now, you're a visual storytelling guy, right? Like that's a big part of your thing. And I'm curious how you see that moment again, going back to that moment, how much storytelling plays a part, being able to listen and like understand stories, or the story that you're hearing, essentially, as step one. And then the step two is kind of then controlling the narrative, like telling the story that gets that prospect or customer to, the next step. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's super important to test for your understanding after you've had that initial dialogue where you're asking questions. They're giving you information rather than just saying, yeah, that makes sense, or okay, I get it. It's then telling the story back to them as like, okay, here's what I'm hearing, and tell me if I'm wrong. X, Y, and Z seems to be the reason why we're having this conversation because of the problem that you're having X, Y, here. And that goes back to they'll correct you if you're right. And then you can go deeper into why that is a problem and why is it a problem now. Or if you get it wrong, they'll correct you. And then you go down that road and then you continue to weave in and out, testing for understanding, digging deeper till you get to the root of the issue.
Yeah. You know what I love about this is that that's that scientific mindset again of, I'm going to test for, you literally said it, test for understanding. I'm going to give you the story that I think I heard, and they will tell you, no, that was wrong. You forgot about this, or no, actually I meant that, or they'll validate it. And so you're as this, and if you can speed up that cycle of iteration. Now tell me if you agree with this. I feel like a lot of people are, especially like in inexperienced junior reps or SDRs are kind of nervous about throwing out an hypothesis, right? Like a story, because they don't want to be seen as wrong, even though they don't sort of see that being wrong is actually, it's actually a good thing. Like whether you're wrong or right, they're both good.
Yeah. And I think that's just getting them to understand, like, hey, it's okay if you're wrong. So go ahead and test your understanding. And if you're wrong, they'll correct you. And you can even
Right.
use the softening statement of like, hey, I'm going to reiterate what I think I heard, but if I'm wrong,
Yeah.
like, correct me. And
Yeah.
that helps to give them a little bit more confidence. But I wanted to circle back to what you had mentioned around testing for understanding, making sure you got it. That's why I'm such a big visual learner. So typically
Mhm.
we do discoveries, and when we go on site, our discoveries are pretty long, complex system process maps. So I like to do whiteboarding because not only am I visually reinforcing in my brain as I'm writing it, but someone can call me out when I get it wrong. Like if I'm starting to draw
Yeah.
an arrow to the wrong place, they're like, actually, that's not how it goes. It actually should go here. And that's when I say, okay, hey, do you mind coming and join me? Because you know this process better than
Mm.
I do. And then it becomes more collaborative versus me just asking questions back and forth.
Yeah. That's why I'm so looking forward to talking to you, because your approach to this thing we're talking about of storytelling and like the collaborative nature of it and stuff is it's visual. So it's there. I mean, it's much more tangible in a sense than having a conversation. And I think what's kind of fascinating about this is it allows us to, well, at least me, I geek out about this stuff. I don't know if everybody else does, but like pick out like what's working in that, and so like that collaborative thing is great. The fact you threw that story out, that other person is now meeting you there halfway and saying, and now it's a partnership, which is incredibly powerful.
Yes. Yeah. I haven't been in a meeting where we've done like where we've been on site and we've done whiteboarding where I haven't had someone either join me or say, hey, can you leave that here? Or can I take a picture of it before you erase it? Because of the fact you start to engage in a more collaborative conversation. It's visual. So people you keep their attention because you're
Mm,
up front and you've got a lot more motion going on, which keep people engaged just because our brain is wired to follow movement.
mm.
So for me, it's just, and I have, I'm a salesperson. I have ADD. So I'm like, I need to stand up to keep myself engaged.
Yeah, exactly. And how many times you get this reaction where it's like, where people see the visual and they're like, yeah, that's what I was like, finally, that's what I was thinking. Like you give them that moment of clarity.
I think it's more of the, wow, I didn't realize we were as screwed up as because now
Ah,
we visually see it. The other really good thing about it is how many times have you been in a meeting and then 20 minutes later, the C level person walks in or someone walks in 20 minutes late. And if you're just having a conversation back and forth or doing whiteboarding, someone comes in late and they're like looking at it and like, oh, hey, you missed one thing. I
mm,
want to make sure that the solution also does X and it's not covered there.
yeah,
So like it's
yeah,
a great way to like keep people when they come in to be brought up to speed versus having to stop the meeting or trying to catch them up because that's never a fun
yeah,
situation, but it's a common one.
yeah, yeah. That's great. And so you're using this process for discovery to kind of like paint the picture of the problem essentially, and then also for solution design.
But yeah, so typically we'll do like a before and after where
Yeah. Okay.
state, future state. But there's so many different areas that you can, I mean, obviously we follow each other on LinkedIn. So you've seen, you can use it for meeting recaps. You can use it for webinar follow-up
Mm,
or, you do industry research and then being able to share. It's just a different way that,
mm,
and in a climate like this, you need to differentiate yourself and do things differently. So a lot of different,
yeah. Exactly. Yeah, it goes back to that point. Like what worked before isn't working, and this is definitely something new and different. So how does your team buy into this? Are you actively teaching them how to do this?
So yes, however, like much like every other there are certain reps that will take to it and do it, and I have some reps that are big fans and proponents of it, and then have others that are less into it. And I'm always going to lead by example, and if I'm not going to ask them to do something that I wouldn't do, number
Yeah.
one. But number two, I'm not going to force them to do something if they don't feel confident or comfortable, because I want them to feel comfortable when they're presenting, when they're talking to customers. So it's more about giving them some tools and exposing them to the idea.
Mm.
And eventually, if it feels like something they want to do, they've got me and other resources where they can leverage that. But I'm not going to force them to do something that they don't feel comfortable with.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. And so you're just exposing them to it as much as possible. You're showing how it benefits you. You can educate if someone's interested, but it's not mandatory.
Correct. Not mandatory.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we might come back to some of these points. I want to go and talk about leadership a little bit more generally. So, what is something you believe about what makes a good leader that maybe not everyone would also believe, right? Like what's an uncommon thing that you believe about it?
Yeah, I don't know if people would disagree with this, but I believe that trying and failing is better than not trying and playing it safe. Because I think the more you try and you fail things, that's how you learn. So like it's okay to go out and make mistakes. So
Mm.
I'm a big believer of the faster you fail, the faster you learn.
Mm. Yeah, I think there will be people. I have definitely come across people who don't. There's the fear of failure so strong in some people that, like, to your point, I think that's the danger is you don't play it safe, and no one really learns.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So that's great. So I'm wondering, like, what are some of your influences in leadership? You clearly have that growth mindset. You believe, in all these things you're saying, and you lead by example. What examples have you looked up to?
Yeah, I think growing up, I was always a super competitive kid, and I was like, where did that come from? And I think it came a lot from my father. He wasn't like a competitive person, but he was always, I can remember, and I say this to my boys now,
Mm.
and I can remember I would say, I can't do that, or I don't know how to do that. And he'd be like, can't's not a word. I'm like, yeah, it is. Like, and I just remember, like, he would say that nonstop. Like, when I say I can't do that, and I can't's not a word.
Yeah,
It kind of just drilled into me, like, if you put in the work, you can do just about anything. So believe in yourself and believe in your abilities. And I think that had a big impact on me growing up and where I am now. And
yeah,
you said the whole growth mindset of like, it's that, well, can't's not a word. Like, where there's a
yeah,
will, there's a way. You just got to figure it out,
yeah,
think about it differently.
yeah. I love that because it's basically it's like can't's not a word, but it doesn't mean that you will do it successfully the first time, right? Like that, he's also saying that, right? It's like he's just saying try and like make the mistake, but at least you'll learn.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's like you presently
yeah,
struggle with, but that
yeah,
doesn't mean that you can't get to where you need to be. You just got to put in the work.
yeah. Yeah, that's great. I think a lot of people can relate to that kind of approach. It's definitely. I'm thinking of my dad as well. It's something that he would definitely say. And then, like, I've got a boy, and yeah, I definitely pass it on. It sounds like you do too.
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah,
They say the same exact thing. They're like, "Dad, yes, it is. It's contracted with can and not." I'm like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, they'll get it. They'll get it. Um, So okay, so let's talk about now. Like you've been at Bullhorn for 11 years. You've been leading. I assume for most of that, all of that.
no, not all of it. For probably about the last 6.5 years.
Okay, all right. So what has been the hardest thing you've had to do as a leader in that time?
For me, it's anytime I have to let someone go because they're not necessarily the right fit. That's always the
Yeah.
hardest part for me. And but it happens. It's part of the job, right?
What do you think makes them not the right fit? And I know it's hard to generalize. You probably have specific examples in your head, but like, what are you looking for when you talk about fit?
I think a lot of the people that I had to let go were actually my fault, meaning that what I thought I wanted when I hired them was not actually the right skill set or the right profile of person that should have been in the role. So it really started with me of putting them in a position where they weren't going to be successful because what I thought I wanted wasn't really what was needed. And then me trying to get them where they needed to be wasn't panning out. So we had to make the decision to go in another direction. But again, it all revolves around me and not actually the individual person that I had to let go.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, and so there's a lot of work that goes before that final decision is made. That kind of leads me to another question I was going to ask, and this seems like a good place for it. Is what are you doing to ensure people are successful? Like, what are you doing to give them the confidence to lead and to even in their own way, just take responsibility for their work?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do a good job of one enablement from when a new person starts to get them up to speed. The boot camp I think it's been reduced from what it used to be from a timing perspective. I know when I started, I was 9 out of 12 weeks in Boston. When I first started, I had a 3-month-old, which my wife really enjoyed that.
Yeah,
That's part of the job. But
yeah,
enablement, and we spend a lot of time. We've got a saying here at Bullhorn: "It's never win alone, never lose alone," and that's not just with our team, the leaders, the individual producers, but if we need other people in the organization, whether it's in product or support or customer success, everybody's willing to help out and make sure that the people feel like they've got the support and the resources. And that's more for ICs. But then we start to talk about how do we transition people to people leaders?
yeah,
It's a much harder thing because I know when I was moved to a people leader, I was not ready. I was an individual
yeah,
contributor. I had the opportunity to be successful and then take on more responsibility. But it took me a long time to learn that not everybody learns the same way that I do. Not everybody thinks the same way that I think. Not everybody knows the same things that I know, because it's very easy to be like, oh, well, everybody knows that. Well,
yeah,
that's not the case. And
yeah.
Bullhorn over the last couple of years have developed a leadership program that's about 12 months that we run internally. They do it as like a cohort style where throughout the year there are on-site sessions where there's learning opportunities, and it ends with like a capstone project where they've got to present a business problem that is an actual problem at our organization to the C-suite. So they get practice throughout that. And it's good. It's been a good addition to our enablement and leadership training.
Actually, I want to know a little bit more about that. So how do they select these cohorts? Is this kind of like a high performer program? Like what is that? How's that selection process?
They typically are looking at the frontline managers that are like manager, senior manager, director level that are on the path to potential vice president roles, and that we will go to their direct leaders to nominate, like, hey, we've got this program coming up. This is what's included when it's going. And we're thinking about these potential participants. Are there any others that you want to nominate as part of the
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so then a cohort's formed and they stick together for a year, meeting like kind of how often?
Typically it's quarterly. Like we'll have
Okay.
quarterly meetings, but then they'll have some virtual sessions or projects that they need to work on throughout the session. But I think there's 4 quarterly on nights where they're there for 2 days at a time.
Okay. And are they taught like skills and mindsets and stuff during those on sites?
Yeah, a little bit of everything, like dealing with difficult situations, radical candor, all the way through how to coach, what's the difference between managing and coaching and leading. So they have a pretty wide curriculum of stuff. So
yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's like textbook stuff. Oh, and then the last piece is it sounds like they're working on actual work problems during it. So it's not like felt like I'm getting taken out of the field to do this thing.
Yeah, it's pretty neat because, and I took it several years ago, but basically towards the end, you form groups, small groups of like, I think we had 4 or 5 people, and you had to come up with an actual problem that was going on that you saw in the business. What was the problem? And then how do you go about solving it? So we had to state a business case to our C levels of here's the problem, here's why it's a problem, here's how we think we could solve it. So it also got us in the practice of problem solving and thinking globally versus it's very easy to get stuck in your like, this is a sales problem, this is how we're going to fix it versus, but the sales problem impacts finance, it impacts HR, it impacts professional services. So thinking globally versus in our silo.
Yeah. That's huge. How important is problem solving as a skill to you guys at Bullhorn?
I mean, I would put it in the top 3, especially as a salesperson, right? That's probably number 1. That is your job. Your job is to find problems, solve problems, go find the next problem.
Yeah. It kind of, you said the hammer and a nail thing, like it's in a good way. This, you can apply that here where like you could see everything as a problem. And if you can then apply problem solving techniques, practice and experience. That is a skill that you can get good at.
And the big thing is helping your reps understand that a problem doesn't necessarily equal a headache or a problem. A problem equals an opportunity. That means that someone has a problem that they need to solve, and you can be the one to help them solve it. And I think a lot of times I'll talk to, account managers that are like, I've got this customer, they're really difficult, they have all these issues. I'm like, that's a gold mine. That is a gold mine customer. If you can help them solve those problems, you become the hero, and then you really develop that strong bond with a customer because you're helping them do what your job is. You're helping solve problems, which leads to opportunity.
I love that. That's like, this is going to be a clip for this show, because like that was great. Like problems equals opportunities. I couldn't agree with you more. So here's a follow-up question. When you often, you uncover a whole bunch of them, and like you say, it's like, it looks like a bee's nest, and you're just like, holy shit, like what do I do? But you see that as a gold mine. How do you help people think through sequencing the solving of that? Because you also don't want to overwhelm the prospect of the client saying, oh, we've got this massive, you can fill a whiteboard with the solution. Like, how do you think about doing it in chunks?
I have a very simple framework that I use and that I try to get the reps to think of. It's first understand what the high level problem is. And then you ask the question of who's impacted and how. Where is it happening and how often? When is it happening? Why is it happening? And then you can get to the how. So it's all the basic questions that you learn in elementary. It's who, what, when, how, and why. But do that for every problem, because many times you get the surface level, but you don't go deep enough to also know who else is impacted, how often is it impacted, and why is it a problem. So it's super simple framework, but it really helps you to unpack all of the necessary. And it's come from the experience of sometimes I'll get in a meeting and I'll be explaining the problem to someone I need help with, like in PS, like, here's the problem. They'll be like, well, who else is involved? What are the other customers that are involved by this same thing? I'm like, well, I don't know. Or, when is it happening? Well, I'm not sure. They just told me it's a problem and it's, I need to fix it. So part of it's just been trial and error. And then simple.
And so you gathering all this information, and then so again, like say you get to that point, but you've identified like 3, 4, 5 problems with the client. Like, how do you know which is the one to start with? often it's not, you want to boil an ocean. A client doesn't want to boil the ocean either, right? They're like, okay, well, do you think, is it the client that's leading that? How do you navigate that?
Good question. And that kind of, so we instituted a process this year where we created these client scorecard, and it is basically like experience, executive alignment. It's a team performance, both from account management, CS, product adoption, how they feel like it's like a set of like 9 questions that we do quarterly. And they score us on a scale of 1 to 5 of like, here's where you're doing good. Here's where you need to improve. Here's where we're having challenges. And then it allows us to take that and put together a mutual action plan of like, these are the things that we need to work on, or here are what you say are the problems. Knowing that we probably can't accommodate all of these in the next quarter, let's prioritize what's most important to you and is having the biggest impact, but not lose sight of the other things that we need to work on and fix. So I really think it's a partnership with them to figure out how do we prioritize the problems that have the biggest impact.
Yeah, and then keep that running list of like, these are the other things we said we'd come back to, which then goes back again. It's another moment, right? Like that's another moment to win there, to really get to because that could also derail it, where they're like, actually this is just, I don't know where to start. Like, I'm not interested in engaging with you guys. We're going to go somewhere else, right? Like if you've got to really get them over the line at every moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it also gives the AM a baseline to know where they stand or what opportunities they have to go solve problems. Is having that conversation to really understand what's going well, what's not going well, what are the challenges. Okay, let's work together to prioritize and knock them out.
Yeah. I want to go back to, you mentioned like this transition into people leadership. One of the things that we've seen is that there's an almost like criminal underinvestment in training managers. Like a lot of resources get put into training IC level. And then there's one stat that blows my mind, that the companies spend 1/8 of the amount that they spend recruiting managers on training. So there's, huge budget to recruit and then tiny budgets to train them. A lot of managers don't receive any training in their first 2 years. And that leads to underperformance across the board. And underperforming managers have 260% higher turnover on their teams, right? And so like that, and that's the shocking stat. I think that's the scary one. It sounds like you prioritize it. I'm curious if you've seen elsewhere, like, why is it so under prioritized?
That's a good question. I don't know. And I feel like I've been lucky to find Bullhorn and land here. And I've had a lot of great leaders. But the biggest thing is like my leader today, who's my SVP, started the same day that I did 11 years ago. Right.
Wow.
So that consistency in leadership and direction and ownership and accountability, that's very uncommon, right? The average lifespan of a VP of sales is like 18 months. And mine has been here for 11 years. And our CRO has been here for 18. Our president has been here for 18. Our founder's still here. So I think a lot of it's a culture thing too. And I think it filters down from the top. Like if you got a strong culture and built on integrity and being genuine, like it trickles down to the rest of the leaders as well as producers.
Totally agree. I totally agree. And I think that is the differentiator right there, as opposed to like the other end of the spectrum where you've got companies that are, kind of set up for exit from the beginning. And so it's very much just like, we want to churn through, quarters and just get results and it doesn't matter. People are kind of a resource. Let's just, swap them out if we need to. And that, so the approach that you're taking at Bullhorn can sometimes seem like a longer term approach, right? Is that, do you agree with that?
Well, we always want to, we want the results as quickly as possible, but we also want a long-term view at the problems or the things that we're going to solve. Is that balance.
Right, exactly. And that's the danger. It's actually either swinging too far either way is a bad thing. And yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so I have two more questions. I think one's going to be a good one to end it off. The other one is to kind of zoom into a little bit to these moments for to kind of close the loop on this. And often when in those moments, they are high pressure, often high stress, right? Especially if there's a lot on the line, there's a high stakes. I want you to think back to some of those that you've been in, and I want you to share how you have coped in the moment. Like a lot of people have different strategies for dealing with that, to be able to like calm themselves, regulate, keep their sort of composure, all those kind of things. How do you typically approach that?
I think for the most part, I'm a pretty level-headed person in general. Like try not to get too high or too low, but I think, like in a situation where, like, let's say there is a customer that is in a really, really bad spot and they're threatening to leave and
Right.
they're being very aggressive. Like for me, it's like I never take anything personal, and it's more about I'm trying to put myself in their shoes and empathize with where they're at and why they're in what they see as a really bad spot. So I try to just listen and understand. But for like bigger things, like, hey, you've got this big number and you're not getting there and there's a lot of stress. Like for me, it's like I can only do what I can control, and I'm going to put the variables in place so I can control. I can't control things outside of my control. And I always try to bring things into perspective, right? Like at the end of the day, I'm selling software. I'm not going off to fight a war. I'm not a doctor saving people's lives. I've got friends that are younger than me that have been diagnosed with, terminal illnesses. And I'm like, this is really hard. And there's a lot of pressure, but like things could be so much worse. I'm not going to let something like this impact my mental health or my well-being. So perspective, I think, is very big in those type of situations as well.
Yeah, that's two great components to that answer: the perspective and controlling what you control, and letting go of the things that you can't. Yeah, that's so key. Okay, so to kind of bring this thing to a close, I think what's striking me in a lot of these conversations, and everybody listening can hear from this conversation that why you're on this show. Like you get the benefit of learning, and it's how we started this whole conversation. And so in that spirit, the spirit of kind of everyone learning together here, what are some of the challenges that you see? And you don't have to get super specific to like your book of business and Bullhorn and all that, but what are the challenges you see the profession having to face, and some of the things like that we can start to think about that can help us with this?
Sales in general or sales enablement?
Let's start with sales in general, because I think then we can maybe drill into sales enablement.
I think that there is a big push on the whole AI and generative AI to help do outreach and things at scale. And I think it's actually making reps worse. And the outreach that is being done, specifically if we talk about cold outreach and everybody trying to use some form of chat GPT or something to leverage the efficiency of not having to use your brain to think and have it do it for you. It still reads as a robot, and it's making, I don't think it's going to replace reps. I think it's going to make the good reps better because they're not going to sound like a robot. And then two, those that learn how to use it effectively will also do do better than those that are just saying
it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's awesome. That is the topic of a whole new podcast we could do together. So I couldn't agree more. And we use the term human intelligence to distinguish it. And we believe people should be training and developing human intelligence, because that's going to be the differentiator. Augmented with AI, sure, 100%. But like you've got to lean into that human intelligence. And that's all the stuff we've been talking about, right? Like winning those moments, asking questions, active listening, storytelling. Yeah. That's a great one. That's really cool. And I think anybody listening who resonates with that should definitely reach out to Keith. Does that coming out in your content much at all? How much do you think about AI and its role in all this?
I haven't done a lot of talking about it because I still, it just hasn't. My whole thing is around the visual selling piece, and I haven't really gotten into any of that. But I'm sure you've seen it when sometimes you'll get a comment on your post, and you're like, "That's you ask because they'll say the exact thing in your post, but just like rearrange." And I'm just like, it totally loses the authenticity of the purpose of social networking is to really engage in a genuine conversation.
Yeah.
And it's just, it reads like a robot, and it's just like,
I think I totally agree with you, and I've definitely seen that. I think there's an amazing meta lesson built into all of this, which is the stuff that stands out now, like on social media, and that is, it's the authentic, like you're in a conversation with someone, and that same thing is true for sales, right? Yeah. It's the email that you read from the call to outreach all the way to the conversations you're having with the rep. Whether you're talking to a rep that just thinks like a computer and is following a playbook, and someone who's like actually done the work, actually cares about where you're at, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, that goes to it goes to the point of practice, because you talk about like when you have a new rep, you give them a playbook to learn, and you can't expect them to learn it in a month and then it just becomes their own and it's internalized. So that's a challenge with a lot of new reps, right? They go in and they only know what's in the playbook. They don't know how to think outside of the box because they don't have enough reps running the playbook and seeing the different curveballs that are thrown at them to be able to adapt and adjust. So I think the big thing for reps to know is that this is a process that's going to take time, but it's also something that you need to work on and practice every single day, because the more you do that, the faster you'll get to where you want to be.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. And just to like make that point clear, it's reps getting reps.
Yeah.
In playing this stuff, and that goes back to, if you want to know how to do that, go back to the beginning of this conversation, because Keith just shared like that whole process of, coming up with that hypothesis, that research that you were learning from the sales assembly thing, to applying that to the falsification. Like that's what stuff we're talking about here. And it's about getting as many of those at bats to pick up outliers and pick up exceptional bits of information. And you can actually get better at doing that.
Absolutely.
It's very cool stuff. Awesome. Keith, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been super fun. This was well worth the wait. I really did enjoy it. I think we've got like so much more that we could get into. Maybe we can do round 2 at some point. But I want to give you the last word. Anything that you obviously we'll put your links in the show notes for anybody that doesn't follow you yet already. You should definitely change that and check out some of the videos of the whiteboard, which is phenomenal, the virtual whiteboard, blackboard even. Anything else you want to share with folks as a kind of closing thought from your side?
I don't think anything specific, other than if there are other visual learners out there, I'm always happy to connect, and or if they listen and they have questions based on what we talked about, I'm always happy to have a conversation. Just don't send me a chat GPT message. Send me a real authentic human message.
Amen to that. Yeah, go find your tribe, everyone. Thanks for listening. Keith, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate it.
Hello. I hope you enjoyed that episode. It's Andrew again with a quick message. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is to leave us ratings and reviews where you listened. If you're on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe buttons, and feel free to leave a comment. We love hearing from our listeners and viewers. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please take the time to give us a rating and leave a review. Once again, we love hearing from our loyal listeners. If you're listening to this on Spotify, please hit the follow button to make sure that you don't miss new episodes as they come out. See you next week for another episode of the Learning Culture Podcast. Thank you for listening.